to the June 12th, 2025 Planning Commission hearing. We'll call the meeting to order at 1 p.m. Ms. Carmen, can we please have roll call?
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. I will begin with Vice Chair Boss.
Present.
Commissioner Barnwell.
Here.
Commissioner Bauke.
Here.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Here.
Commissioner Peterson is absent, and Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get started with preliminary matters, requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or ex-agenda items. Ms. Kokinda, do we have any?
No, thank you. Ellen Kokinda, I'm the acting city planner. We do not have any.
Thank you. And do we have any announcements or appeals?
I do have two appeals and an announcement. One, we have an announcement of an appeal at 418 North Milpas for a mixed-use development that will be going to City Council on August 12th. We also have an appeal of 633 East Cabrillo Boulevard. This is the Hilton Hotel edition. It is slated for September 23rd for the appeal at City Council, but that isn't going, that's going to City Council next Tuesday on the 17th to be determined. So there could be a change. So just be aware of that. We'll report back if there's any change. And then this is just a reminder that the June 19th Planning Commission meeting is canceled. That's the Juneteenth holiday, so there will be no Planning Commission. But we will have a Planning Commission meeting on July 3rd. That there's also a lunch meeting that Ms. Ostringer will be doing legislative updates. So the lunch meeting plus the hearing on July 3rd is tentatively scheduled.
Vice Chair Boss, if anyone could email me what they're particularly interested in separately so I can get something together that's of interest to you, I'd appreciate it. I don't know if it's new stuff or past stuff that you'd like to hear about.
Great. Thank you.
And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now on to item C, review, consideration, and action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes and resolutions for May 15th, 2025, the minutes, as well as the resolutions for 500 James Fowler and 633 East Cabrillo Boulevard. Are there any Planning Commissioner comments on the minutes or resolutions?
Move those.
Okay.
Could we see if there's any public comment?
Yeah. Are there any public speaker comments for any of the minutes or resolutions?
I don't have any speaker slips at this time for public comment on the minutes or the resolutions, but if anyone in the audience would like to comment on it, I'm not seeing any movement.
All right. So we'll ask for a motion to approve the May 15th Planning Commission minutes as well as the resolutions.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Carmen. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. I'll begin with Commissioner Bauke,
Yes.
Commissioner DeLuccio,
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson,
Yes.
Commissioner Barnwell,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Boss.
Yes.
The motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to item E, comments from members of the public pertaining to items that are not on today's agenda. Due to time constraints, each person is limited to 2 minutes. And Ms. Carmen, do we have anyone in person or remote that would like to give public comment on non-agenda items?
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. At this time, I do not have any speaker slips for general public comment. Is that for item 3? Okay. Though if anyone in the audience would like to speak under general, they can come up to the podium at this time. I'm not seeing any movement. We don't have any participants online, and we didn't receive any written correspondence for this, so I'm going to give it back to you.
Great. With that, we'll close general public comment, and we'll move on to item 3, HE1, adaptive reuse ordinance. And we have Dana Falk and Rosie Deisty with us to provide a staff presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. Good afternoon, Planning Commission. I'm Dana Falk, Long Range Project Planner for the city, presenting to you on the adaptive reuse ordinance to implement Housing Element 1. The recommendation for the item today is that Planning Commission amend the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to add section 30.185.045 adaptive reuse projects, determine that the adaptive reuse ordinance is exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, and determine that the adaptive reuse ordinance is consistent with the general plan. Before we jump into the presentation today, I do want to point out that this ordinance is deceptively simple. It has a lot of ties and connections back to the zoning ordinance itself, so in the municipal code at large. So even if the ordinance is silent on something, the rest of the municipal code still does apply to these projects. And with that, I'm going to highlight some of the background efforts that went into creating this ordinance. There were multiple touch points that staff had with the community. I do want to point out that the housing element, which includes Housing Element Program 1, which this implements, was adopted by City Council in December of 2023 and then certified by the state in February of 2024. So when we look back at everything that's happened since that housing element that's guiding this project was in place, we spoke with Planning Commission twice in 2024 and City Council. We conducted multiple focus groups, both externally and with internal other city departments. And then most recently, we were in front of Planning Commission in December of 2024. Since then, and in 2025, we've hosted more internal and external focus groups. We spoke both with Historic Landmarks Commission as well as the Architectural Board of Review, and we're back before you here today. There are some members of staff from these other city divisions that we met with. We do ask that when we get to the questions portion, we prioritize questions for those other staff so we can use their time most efficiently and let them go early and then come back to planning general questions for us since we'll be here the whole time. I do want to point out just the water meter coordination. I'm not going to touch upon all of them. They are pretty extensively covered in your staff report today. But for water meters, planning staff and water resources staff have been closely coordinating since fall of last year on changing requirements for adaptive reuse projects and water meters. Most recently, in January of 2025, so earlier this year, City Council adopted an amendment for 100% low and very low income affordable adaptive reuse projects. There we go, lots of A's. And so those projects can do private submetering by right. That was something that has been allowed if you request it on a case-by-case evaluation, but this ordinance change meant that these 100% affordable adaptive reuse projects were able to get that without requesting it. As part of the motion from City Council in January, they did request that staff look into allowing all adaptive reuse projects, that same by right allowance, and I will say that Water Resources staff has been very productive and went to their Water Commission in April of this year on the 17th, and they recommended an ordinance to do exactly that, to allow all adaptive reuse projects to do private submetering by right. We are in coordination on how to move that forward through the adoption process, since it does require a couple more hearings to get that all the way through to the end. But did want to point that out since that's something that is going concurrently with this ordinance here today that will benefit these projects as well. With that, I'm going to jump into the ordinance. And I want to make it really clear, this ordinance is an incentive zoning program. So if a project meets all the requirements, the definition of an adaptive reuse project, they get the incentives that we're proposing. That's not to say if they don't meet them, they can't do their project. We have a change in use process already available, so these projects can already happen. We're just trying to incentivize the ones that create housing with this ordinance. Okay, so with that, the proposed definition for an adaptive reuse project is a change of use of all or any portion of an existing building envelope from non-residential use to one or more new residential units. At its simplest, like I said, adaptive reuse is just change in use. We're trying to make the projects that are creating housing a little bit faster through the process, a little simpler, and hopefully in the hope and effort of creating and facilitating more housing units in these existing buildings. If a project doesn't meet this definition or the requirements I'm going to talk about in a moment, again, they can still convert. It's just called change in use, and they don't get the by right incentives that this ordinance proposes. For brevity, I'm not going to go through all of the requirements that are detailed in the ordinance as well as the staff report you received for today, but I'll touch on a couple of high points. So the adaptive reuse ordinance is for projects that are converting from existing non-residential use in a 10-year-old building to create housing. The age requirement that we have listed here is to try and close some loopholes so a project doesn't develop under non-residential standards, which are a little bit different than for non-residential uses. So we want to make sure that this is really being used to reuse existing buildings rather than allow a project to come in, build, and then basically not have to do any of these residential development standards that are being incentivized in this ordinance. The adaptive reuse ordinance would not remove the right for buildings less than 10 years old to convert to housing. It just means they don't get the by right incentives. We are requiring that the existing building envelope be the scope of the project. There are a few allowances for additions that I'll cover in a little bit more detail later. And then arguably the kind of biggest impact of this ordinance is that it would be allowed citywide in all zones that allow multi-unit residential in Title 30. Since this is a Title 30 amendment, at present it would not apply to coastal, but any zone in the inland portion of the city that's multi-use residential could utilize this ordinance. And to give a visual of what that means here, the dark blue are all of our mixed-use zones. They're concentrated in the commercial core and corridors of the city. Those are zones that allow multi-unit residential and commercial or manufacturing uses. The lighter blue on this map are the multi-unit residential use zones. And the gray are places that don't allow multi-unit residential use at present. Those are things like the single-unit zones, as well as the coastal zone shown in hatched. Again, this is a Title 30 ordinance amendment, so it only applies where the Title 30 is in effect. Now, for projects that met the definition and the requirements I just walked through, they receive 4 development incentives. They're density, open yard, parking, and setbacks. No maximum residential density would apply to adaptive reuse projects. That means as many units as could fit within that existing building envelope could be proposed, with a minimum and maximum thresholds as well that are detailed in the staff report and the ordinance. So I'm not going to talk about them too much today. The open yard incentive removes the requirements. That's a residential development requirement that would not have to be met for these converting buildings. For vehicle parking, no additional parking would be required beyond what's already there, and there is some adjustments to the required amount of parking per unit. When we expanded this citywide, we had to reevaluate. And the final development incentive being proposed is for setbacks. The existing building setbacks could host residential units within that space. Some of the development standards and requirements I want to highlight on this slide here are ones that are specific to adaptive reuse projects, as well as some existing requirements that apply to all multi-unit residential projects in the city. So for adaptive reuse requirements, there is a maximum average unit size special to these projects, and there is a requirement for non-residential ground floor on State Street from Montecito to Sola, and that's to activate the streetscape. Some of the existing requirements that apply to all multi-unit residential, including adaptive reuse projects, are stormwater management program, the inclusionary housing requirements, and the minimum unit size and bicycle parking requirements. And I will note that staff did a bunch of research into the stormwater management plan based on our conversation at the last Planning Commission hearing. It is included in, I believe, D of your staff report. But when we looked at some of the example change in use projects, we found that 66% of them did not require anything for stormwater. They were exempt. And the other 3 that we did more research on were Tier 1 and Tier 2. So just as a background information. And then inclusionary housing, those would still apply all the requirements for either ownership units or for rental units. I will note staff is working as a separate and concurrent effort on reevaluating the inclusionary housing requirements citywide, and so it is not covered specifically for adaptive reuse projects in this ordinance because it is being looked at holistically as a separate effort. And then the last part of the ordinance I'm going to overview today is a little highlight of the permit review process. So because these development incentives are within this ordinance, projects would no longer require a zoning modification to receive them. As well as larger AUD projects have a requirement for pre-application and concept review that would not be required for these adaptive reuse projects. And in effect, it would lower the fees and ultimately reduce permitting durations for some of these projects. In effect, some projects may be able to go straight to building permit with these changes that we're proposing today. I lied, there's one more slide about the ordinance. I do want to touch on really quickly some of the noteworthy changes that staff has been working on since we last saw you. There were 3 topics that we were asked to evaluate: their applicability, the additions outside the existing building envelope, and the ground floor non-residential requirement. So for applicability, back in December, you guys asked for us to expand it, and we have. It is now citywide to all multi-unit residential use zones. As for additions, we were asked to look at increasing flexibility for those additions outside the building envelope, which we did. We increased the allowance for any residential amenity that's available to all tenants to 600 square feet or 10% of the existing building floor area. There is still no limit on any new residential floor area within the existing building envelope, mezzanines, lofts, all of that. It's not restrained. And any addition outside the envelope that's required to meet building code, so the minimum space you would need to do an egress stair, for example, all good. And then the final change that we were asked to look into was the requirement for ground floor non-residential. Again, that was on State Street from Montecito to Sola, only for lots fronting onto State Street, with the intention to activate the streetscape. We looked at a multitude of different options, walked State Street back, forward, and sideways, and didn't end up changing our recommendation in the ordinance. We still recommend that the minimum depth of 35 feet be required as a non-residential use for that segment of State Street for adaptive reuse projects. Okay, next steps. All ordinance amendments in the city require 4 public hearings. This is the first of them for us, so you with Planning Commission today to hopefully recommend this ordinance on to City Council for adoption. We are scheduled to go to Ordinance Committee, which is the next hearing we need to hit on July 29th, with City Council introduction and adoption following on after those dates. This assumes that there's no major changes to this ordinance and we're able to proceed. If we do need to make any major changes, this schedule may not be maintainable. I do want to note that the housing element does ask this program to be completed by the end of this calendar year, December 2025. And right now we're on track to meet and, dare I say, exceed that schedule. Now for the fun stuff, environmental review. I'm going to read this part straight from the staff report. Staff has determined this action qualifies for an exemption from further environmental review under Section 15061B3, General Rule of the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines, because it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the proposed adaptive reuse ordinance may have a significant effect on the environment. The staff report also went into more detail on the analysis for change in use, residential unit quantities, existing building envelope, and environmental review. For general plan consistency, this is required for all ordinance amendments, and staff has determined that the proposed ordinance is consistent with general plan policies and programs. It encourages adaptive reuse, a mix of land uses, sustainable neighborhood planning, and infill housing. If you want to read the full consistency analysis, it's Exhibit B in the staff report. And finally, back to the recommendation, staff recommends that Planning Commission amend the municipal code, determine that the ordinance is exempt from CEQA, and determine the ordinance is consistent with the general plan. With that, I conclude today's staff presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Volk. That takes us to comments from members of the public pertaining to this specific item. Ms. Carmen, do we have anyone in person or remote that would like to give public comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. At this time, I do have 4 speaker slips for in-person public comment. It will be, first up will be Rob Fredericks, followed by Linda Honigman, and then Ben Romo, and then Lisa Carlos. If there's anyone else in the room that would like to speak on this topic, you can fill out a speaker slip at the back of the room and bring it up to me, but we'll start with Rob.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Boss and Planning Commissioners. Rob Fredericks here with the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara. First, I want to thank staff for their great and thoughtful work, and the Planning Commission for taking up this adaptive reuse ordinance today. It's encouraging to see this initiative move forward at a time when vacant commercial buildings linger, while the need for housing, especially affordable housing, grows more urgent every day. This ordinance rightly implements HE1 of the housing element by promoting creative reuse of existing building stock. Adaptive reuse is a smart, sustainable strategy. It conserves resources, revitalizes our core districts, and brings housing closer to where people work, shop, and play. We are pleased to see several provisions that will make the real-world adaptive reuse more feasible, such as the allowing of limited exterior additions, the 600 square feet or 10%, whichever is greater, parking flexibilities, maintaining existing setbacks and exempting projects from architectural review when no exterior changes are proposed, and most importantly, expanding the ordinance to apply outside of the State Street Central Business District in all zones that allow residential. That's the right move. There's been concern voiced about inclusionary housing requirements undermining feasibility, and some have claimed that this ordinance should allow for no inclusionary requirements. As a developer of affordable housing, I understand razor-thin margins, but inclusionary housing is not a deal breaker if done thoughtfully. As I have stated previously, the rent differential between inclusionary and market units can be absorbed by modest rent adjustments across the remaining market units without jeopardizing project viability. The Housing Authority has firsthand experience with adaptive reuse through our Quality Inn conversion project, and unfortunately, probably due to the lack of having such an adaptive reuse ordinance in place, we've been experiencing a process that seemed to be treated as if it's ground-up construction. We had initial challenges with parking, even though all of our tenants will be coming from homelessness and will not have vehicles. That's a systemic problem. Adaptive reuse deserves an adaptive process. Let's ensure that staff across all departments are aligned on treating these projects appropriately once we have this ordinance in place. So I urge you to recommend this ordinance move swiftly to council. Let's make adaptive reuse not just possible, but practical. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we'll have Linda Honigman.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Linda Honigman, an affordable housing advocate who will be reading the letter you received from Strong Towns since their leaders are at work. Thank you for the opportunity for Strong Towns Santa Barbara to support an important component of the city's housing element implementation, an adaptive reuse ordinance. Strong Towns was founded with the aim of working closely with local officials to promote and enact policies which embody best practice urban planning principles. For Santa Barbara, that means supporting policies and programs that can significantly increase our housing supply to match community needs. As we wrote in our letter to Council last July, the housing cost increase has been so drastic that 55% of renters are cost burdened. This impacts the workers that we rely on for critical roles, such as teachers, nurses, custodians, contractors, and more. It is our responsibility to those residents and workers to try to increase the housing supply as much as possible. Converting existing buildings to housing and removing hotels as a competitor are low-cost ways to get supply moving in the right direction. The proposed ordinance ensures that the number of units can increase in our multifamily zones without decreasing future livability for the community. We believe that the incentives, including no maximum density and the reduction of parking requirements, will help incentivize those conversions. We also agree that the incentive to waive pre-application and concept review requirements is appropriate and helpful to the housing element goals. Strong Towns believes in working collaboratively to build a prosperous place, and we look forward to working with you, city staff, and organizations who share our goals to make Santa Barbara more resilient, physically sound, and people-oriented, one step and home at a time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Ben Romo.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for having me today. I submitted a letter with more cogent comments, but I'll be verbose up here as well. Basically, our feeling is, from our experience doing projects downtown like this, I think really the only substantial adaptive reuse projects that have been done in the Central Business District in any time recently, other than maybe the Granada, we feel that the policy as written will lead to no new projects in the Central Business District. We talk about crises, we talk about matters of urgent concern in this city. We don't always act like they are crises or matters of urgent concern. If you feel that revitalizing downtown and revitalizing State Street is a matter of urgent concern, you will adopt the policy without a requirement to comply with the city's existing inclusionary ordinance. Downtown is the most expensive and the most complex place to do development in the city, probably. Construction costs are through the roof. Labor shortages have been with us for a long time, and with the LA fires, they're about to get worse as they begin to rebuild down there. Interest rates are super high. Land values downtown are among the most expensive. Requiring affordable housing in the central business district will kill projects, absolutely. I've been, as I mentioned, a part of 3. One of them was 821 State, where the owner donated the property, purely philanthropic. The other 2, about a year ago, we were expecting about a 5% return on one project. Now that we don't have really the reasonable expectation of getting a voucher to help cover the cost of our subsidized rents, we don't expect to have that kind of return. We expect it to be lower, especially in this climate of high interest rates. A 5% return or lower is unacceptable for most property owners, for almost every developer. The people I work with are the unicorns. They cannot be depended upon. We can't expect property owners to act philanthropically with their private investments, take the risks, go through the headaches of trying to get a project approved in a very challenging market and a very challenging location. Additionally, many developers are not willing to have, many property owners are not willing to have a 90-year relationship with the government in their property. So a deed restriction that requires government involvement in their property is not something that many will accept. It is less than a majority of properties are even eligible legally, I believe, for being candidates for adaptive reuse. The more barriers you put up, the fewer projects you get. And I believe the inclusionary ordinance requirement is a barrier that will get your adaptive reuse projects in the future to 0 unless you have a philanthropic or a government subsidized project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Lisa Carlos.
Wait until after, or no? Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair Boss and Commissioners. My name is Lisa Carlos. I'm a longtime affordable housing advocate who grew up in Santa Barbara, went to public schools here, and deeply value both our diversity and architectural heritage. There are lots of reasons why I fully support this adaptive reuse ordinance as drafted. Reusing existing buildings to create more housing makes sense. It's good for the environment, good for preserving our community character, and good for revitalizing our downtown. The incentives included, like density flexibility and streamlined review with no exterior changes, are made, strike a fair and thoughtful balance. But what doesn't make sense is allowing our modest inclusionary requirements to be put aside. For example, our inclusionary rental ordinance only requires 10% of units to be affordable, and specifically for moderate income households. A hotel manager, medical professional, or city worker earning up to $100,000 or a couple making $114,000 would qualify. And because there are no public subsidies for moderate income housing, inclusionary policies are a critical mechanism for creating such workforce housing. Some argue that by waiving affordability, we will encourage more market rate housing, which in turn will have a filtering or vacancy chain effect. I've studied that research really carefully, and what it actually says is, it depends. It depends specifically on local economic conditions and demand elasticity. And here in Santa Barbara, demand is not elastic. We're a globally desirable city. New market rate housing is often snapped up by high-income newcomers, international students, or remote tech workers, not the people who already live and work here. So in our context, new market rate housing doesn't automatically free up homes for lower-income residents. It actually prices them out. And as we add more high-income households, we also increase the demand for additional service workers, who in turn also need affordable housing, but won't be able to find it. That undermines our climate goals too, as longer commutes drive up emissions, offsetting the environmental gains of adaptive reuse. The bottom line is that we need both, market rate and affordable housing. develop side by side. That's how we build a community that's inclusive, resilient, and economically vibrant. That's how we ensure new housing benefits everyone, not just those at the top. Down the line, once we have results from the city's inclusionary financial feasibility and nexus studies, we should be open to revisiting this topic, however, perhaps by allowing greater flexibility through in lieu fees. But for now, please keep our inclusionary policies intact. They're modest and fair, and they're what makes adaptive reuse a tool for equity, not just efficiency.
Thank you. At this time, I don't have any more speaker slips for in-person public comments, so I'm going to move on to virtual participation. We do have 2 participants online. I do see that Steve Johnson has his hand raised, so I'm going to allow you to talk now. And you should be able to unmute. Steve, are you there? Well, if any other virtual oh, you got it?
Sorry.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I apologize. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. There's some aspects of the proposed ordinance that are very favorable, make a lot of sense, the unlimited density especially. But I would like to see some safeguards for projects in the central business district. There's a potential danger with unlimited density in that 2,000 square foot condos are also allowed. You could see projects consisting exclusively of 2,000 square foot condos. That's the last thing we need. For the central business district, a small amendment would exclude condos completely, allow rental projects only. And I agree, don't require any inclusionary. Instead, require an average unit size of at most 600 square feet. Exactly what is proposed in the land use element of the general plan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And with that, I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to acknowledge that we received written correspondence from Pat Seeley, Steve Johnson, Ben Romo, Fran Galt, Diane Black on behalf of the League of Women's Voters of Santa Barbara, Craig Minus on behalf of the Coastal Housing Coalition, Peter Lewis, Matt Grease on behalf of the AIA Santa Barbara, and Strongtown Santa Barbara. And give it back to you.
Thank you. We'll now open it up to my fellow commissioners for questions. We'll begin with Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have a couple questions for Mr. Romo, if he could come back up, please. Thank you. Thanks for coming back up.
I'll do my best.
So I wondered, we got, as you know, quite a few letters from developers requesting that the inclusionary be eliminated for these adaptive reuse projects. Have you looked at what if the income level was increased at a little bit above moderate? If that would solve the problem? Have you actually looked at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you increased to 160 of AMI or 200 of AMI, you're getting actually pretty close to market.
Okay.
But that wouldn't take care of the dynamic of property owners who just simply, there are some folks who are philosophically and operationally not pleased with the idea of having to enter into a regulatory relationship with government for 90 years.
Right,
on their
okay.
units.
That leads me to my second question.
Because if I could just expand
Yeah,
a little
go ahead.
bit. 'Cause you really need to convince people to do this, Mr. Johnson online mentioned, you could do this with condos at 2,000 square feet. I mean, that's a status quo. You could do 4 units. You could do 4 condos at 2,000 square feet right now under the current ordinance, and you wouldn't have to do any inclusionary housing. You could do 5 because you could add an ADU. And we actually think about things like that as we look at our bottom line going lower and lower, our profit going lower and lower. And again, these are developers that I work with, the Yardys, Jason and Kevin Yardy, who value profit at a much lower rate than what other developers are capable of doing,
Okay, thank you for that. And then my second question is a follow-up to the inclusionary. We've talked a lot on this commission about having, and I know staff is working on it, having in lieu fees as opposed to actually building the affordable units and being in that 90-year contract that you're talking about.
Right.
So is this something that you think would be acceptable to developers?
I think that-
To contribute a one-time in lieu fee to our Affordable Housing Trust Fund in lieu of actually building the units?
I think that would be a helpful point of flexibility. Again, I just, having gone through a few of these and looking at the buildings that we're involved in, we have 3 now. 821 was the first, and now we have 12 East Carrillo, and we have another one on kind of Lower State Street. But each one of them are built in such a way that we're able to get around, or not get around, but comply with fire code in a way that many buildings on State Street and in the Central Business District aren't. So, again, like, I feel a majority of properties just simply aren't available. Then you have to find a property where the tenants, where it's completely vacant. You can't do a project in the upstairs if your downstairs is leased, right? Then you have to convince the developer to take the risk, go through the headache, make the investment, get financing at 6.5% to do their project, or higher, deal with the labor shortages. All of this comes down to just whittling down in the Central Business District the number of properties that'll actually come into play, and we feel that's 0. You know, so yes, it would be helpful. And when we, you know, and to go up to 200, I mean, I feel like that's kind of close to market anyway.
Right.
But it's more like the regulatory side of things. Or that's a different factor, you know. It would definitely be helpful to be able to get more revenue, you know, so. Does that
Okay.
answer your question?
Yes,
Kind of rambling
it
here.
does. Those were some of the things that came up in the public comment letter. So you being here, I just wanted your thoughts on it. So thank you very much for
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, thank you. We'll move to Commissioner DeLuccio.
Thank you, Commissioner Wisdom. Those are the questions I actually would have had for the applicant also. So, but if you want, I can ask some other questions. Are we doing questions now?
Yes.
Okay, I guess the question I had was, as far as within the footprint, it's unlimited development within the footprint. Then I read someplace that you can go higher too? You can increase the height?
That would count as the addition outside the existing building envelope if you were going to do anything next to or above. Within the shell of the roof and the walls that are there, the new floor area, whatever you can make fit with, again, the requirements for ceiling heights and all of that. But there is no specific mention in the ordinance or the staff report to height for adaptive reuse projects.
Right, well, it's not in the ordinance, I did see that, but in the staff report, it did call out height, but I guess in the context of the additional 600 square feet addition or 10%, is that what we're talking about?
I'm afraid I don't understand your question. Can you restate?
So within the footprint, I think this commission, at one point, we did talk about height, potential high, making the buildings higher, okay, but putting that aside, and that's not what is before us today in the ordinance. What is in the ordinance is a possible additions of 600 square feet or 10% of the building.
Correct. So the ordinance refers to the existing building envelope, not just the footprint. So if you want to do an addition outside of that, there are limitations on how much you could add outside that envelope of walls and ceiling in essence. But height was not, if you want to add taller,
So the
there's the
addition
zoning
has
ordinance
nothing to
still
do with
applies.
height. In this case, the addition
No.
has to do with an extension of the building, perhaps.
Yes.
Okay, so the buildings downtown right now, as far as this ordinance, we're trying to give incentives as part of this. Parking, especially in the central business district, is not a big incentive, is it? Because I don't think you need parking now down there.
There are areas, yes, of the central business district that you can use AB 2097 for to.
Most of it, you can probably use AB
Almost all, yes.
2097, okay. And then there's constraints down there with buildings to start, constraints as far as, there's very little open yard or very little setbacks, they don't exist. So I guess if you want to do adaptive reuse, what happens is, in that case, this would allow you to do that. This is almost like non-conformance now, conforming. And if you're going to start doing something different, you'd probably then those things, you'd have to go through this adaptive reuse in order to get allowances to do that?
So under the proposed ordinance, those allowances would be by right development standards. At present, before this ordinance
They're
maybe
not
gets adopted,
conforming,
right?
but they exist. but-
Projects can still do that, as Ben Rum was mentioned, right, 821 State Street converted from, to create 14 residential units there, so they use zoning modifications and other processes in order to do that conversion. Well, that's extra fees, that's extra time, that's extra risk, and so this ordinance would allow those open yard, the setbacks you mentioned, the parking, which obviously
Right.
doesn't apply necessarily in the central business district, those are things that the developer can count on. They know ahead of time, there is no risk there, that they get those, so it makes the project a little bit simpler in terms of the zoning requirements they have to meet.
Okay, and about the streamlining of all this, is that only, you don't have to do the, pre-conceptual review, design review, or pre-application, and that's when you're doing an AUD project?
So yes, the pre-application requirement and the concept of review is something for larger AUD projects that was added as an amendment in sometime in the teens. I could remember it, but it's not important for this conversation. But yeah, so that's a requirement for larger AUD projects that have to go through to get your insight. As part of this ordinance, we're proposing that that requirement, which is based on location and lot size, would not apply because adaptive reuse projects are reusing that existing building envelope. So the height's already pretty much set, the setbacks are pretty much set, the relationship to the street's pretty much set. So that requirement for that additional, again, permit, fee, and time does not apply for adaptive reuse projects that meet the definition and requirements of the ordinance.
Of the entire ordinance or in the central business district? Because
The
outside,
entire ordinance. If you're an adaptive reuse project, you can occur anywhere in the city, Title 30, multi-unit, residential use. I can pull up the map if you want to see all those areas again.
it's fine. If you want to, we can look at that. I'm just looking to find where the incentives are in this.
Yeah.
Adaptive reuse. I think is it because the state has preempted a lot of the local land use that some of these incentives have gone away? Or they can get them a different way, easier than using the adaptive reuse?
There's a million ways through the process, right? We can't accommodate or account for every single one, so we're trying to respond to
Okay.
local conditions. And what we've seen, looking at projects that have been coming in to convert an existing non-residential building to a residential use, and making the adjustments where we can to make those things more feasible and facilitate that conversion. At the end of the day, right, we can't control what's coming down from the state. We're responding just like all the developers are. But I will say everything in the ordinance has been carefully calibrated, looking at past projects, looking at our local zoning ordinance and trying to figure out how can we as the city amend our regulations to help facilitate the conversion to housing.
Okay. And then you're doing the 10-year, the building has to be at least 10 years old before they can do the adaptive reuse. Did we think about 5 years at one point?
We did, yeah. So we looked at a range of building ages, looked at a lot of precedent too for what other jurisdictions require for buildings to, again, receive the incentives that we're proposing. That's not to say a building that's 8 years old couldn't come in and use change in use and convert to housing and request zoning mods for a lot of these different development standards. But in order to get kind of the fast pass, as it were, to not have to do the zoning mod process, to not have to do the pre-app and concept review, if it's required, you have to meet the definition and the requirements of this ordinance,
Okay,
which
so
is a 10-year
I have
building
one
age.
other question. The inclusionary housing question. I'm sure that's going to come up in our discussions a little bit here. So I know that's going to is almost a separate discussion, correct? That that'll be coming back to us. That's when the summertime, is that coming to look at a first draft?
I'll let Rosie answer, because I,
Okay.
Hi, Rosie.
Hi, Vice Chair Boss and Commissioner DeLucio. And I'm, just so you know, I'm an interim principal planner for now. So I'm in the role of sort of moving along all the housing element items. So we do have, it's HE 13, evaluate the inclusionary housing ordinance. We have a consultant who has a contract with us to do the necessary study. And so we're in the process of getting our very first admin draft, internal staff review, and working with our consultant to get a draft that we feel comfortable to come back to you and start talking about. So I don't have a timeline exactly of when we'd be coming back to you, We do have some time. Our deadline in the housing element to sort of get moving on this is still more than a year away to sort of finalize it, find out what the study says, and come back to you with ordinance amendments. But that is moving along.
I mean, we may give you direction today on the inclusionary housing. It has to do with adaptive reuse, but you will be looking at that more carefully as far as perhaps having in lieu fees versus deed restricted, and having looked at other cities, what they do with adaptive reuse and as far as inclusionary housing goes.
Yeah, Vice Chair Boss and Commissioner DeLucio. Yeah, the study has, you know, a whole bunch of prototypes and is looking at not just inclusionary percentages and feasibility, but in lieu fees as well. So, and yeah, we could see what other cities are doing for inclusionary with adaptive reuse. And we'll come back with a set of recommendations. But that will be, the inclusionary will apply not just to adaptive reuse, you know, whoever,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever type of development requires inclusionary.
Just quickly interrupt and note, we're not agendized to talk about the inclusionary housing
Yeah.
ordinance today, but
Right.
I understand it's part of the
Yeah,
conversation.
that's all I'm going to say about it right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Move to Commissioner Bauke.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I've got a number of questions, and my first set of questions involves the building code. So I believe we have a representative of the building department. Could you state your, I don't know what your name is, so.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair Boss, and Commissioner Falke. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
My name is Tina Dye. I'm the Chief Building Official and Floodplain Administrator for the city.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm coming from a perspective that my fellow commissioners probably haven't had, which is, once upon a time, I was a building official and was on the code council and got into the sausage of making code amendments on the statewide level as we go through that adoption process. My question in my experience was that we had a lot of amendments, and some cities take these to a whole nother level, like the city of Los Angeles is probably the one that's probably the most proactive of changing the code, because it is a state code or an international code, but there is an allowance for modifications to meet the local community's needs. My questions are, could you tell us what areas in which your department has looked at possible amendments that would help us get the best case scenario as far as meeting light safety, but also promoting adaptive reuse?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Falke. There are built-in flexibilities within the building code, one of which is to request a code alternate, which would have to show some sort of equivalency to not being able to meet a particular code. And then we also have the existing building code, which allows a little bit more flexibility for existing buildings. So recognizing that there would be constraints in changing an existing building, site constraints, structure constraints, change of use constraints. So we have a few different processes already available for people to propose something alternate. Also, you asked if we have done any research for this specifically. We have processed a couple of code alt requests, and they've been able to be approved, being creative along with the fire department and some of the exiting and egress requirements. And the meat of local code changes will happen shortly. We are gearing up for a triennial code adoption, as I'm sure you're aware. And within that process, we'll have a good look at our existing ordinance and what we can do to modify to, and this will be part of that evaluation, is what can we do to help adaptive reuse projects, With that, we will have a public outreach, and I believe last code cycle update, you all were invited to participate in that. So we'll invite you guys as well to give us some ideas or suggestions. And we will also be looking at other jurisdictions that have existing adaptive reuse ordinances and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We do have to consider local conditions, but if something's worked for another jurisdiction, we'll consider those as well.
Good to hear. The state has passed AB 835, which involves single skid stairs, and I wasn't sure, will you be looking at that that particular amendment as part of that process you just described, or separate from, because it has sort of a different time frame? Some cities are already gearing up those amendments currently. I was just wondering where you were in that process.
Thank you, Commissioner Falke. I did look at that bill. Right now, that's at a state level for the state fire marshal to research and make recommendations to the Building Standards Commission. So we haven't looked at that locally as of yet.
Okay. And I know in the staff report received a very detailed analysis by HCD about adaptive reuse. And there are a lot of those issues, like, sort of the things I was addressing, which is there's a lot of, what I learned is there's a lot of flexibility, but to a point, and it's all about, meeting the life safety needs and making those findings. So I just want to make sure we're on track with this, because a lot of the stuff really gets into the weeds, and that's where this actually, the feasibility is more in the weeds, honestly, than the planning level of this. So I just want to make sure that's done. So I have other questions for staff about a number of other issues. Ms. Falk, how did we come up with the age of 10 years versus 15? I'm thinking that 15 is a number that's in a number of state housing laws, and we're trying to harmonize things. How do we come to 10?
10 was a reduction from 20, which is what staff was considering about a year ago when we first came to Planning Commission and City Council. And at that hearing, we were requested to look at allowing even younger buildings to utilize this ordinance. We looked, like I mentioned, precedent, a lot of different jurisdictions and what they're doing, and decided that here in Santa Barbara, we can do 10 years as the age limit. Again, trying to respond to, some of the arguments we've been hearing, supporting even younger building allowances, just trying to find a balance between those two. So staff decided 10 years was an appropriate building age for our city.
Okay, thank you. Now, as to the pre-application and concept review, getting rid of that, I think it's probably a good thing. And I presume, and you can answer this question, is the concept of waiving that was so it's a faster process, is that correct? And a cheaper process?
Yes to both. Right, if you don't have to do a pre-application and the associated hearing, there is less fees and it doesn't take as long for your project to go through entitlements. It also was trying to look at some of these larger projects when we were doing our precedent research into existing change in use projects that are either in process or have been recently completed. How many hearings did they require? What got talked about? What zoning modifications were required? It really helped us calibrate the incentives that we were proposing. And if a project doesn't do any exterior changes that trigger design review currently, the same triggers are still in place. But we're trying to look at the land use decision. So if a land use decision is not allowed and there's no changes on the exterior that trigger design review, in essence, a project could be done going straight to building permit, not requiring entitlements at all. So the pre-app requirement and the concept review requirement, just actually one thing. If you didn't require that for some of these larger projects, we may be able to offer that incentive of straight to building permit for more sites. And that was the intention behind removing it.
Okay, thank you. And just for a note for the record for Ms. Cook, I have an issue about how our pre-app process is actually working, especially on AUD projects, because I've seen a number of projects in which this commission has clear direction, and when the final application goes, it doesn't come to us, it goes to the Architectural Review Board or HLC, and then they're told that they don't have jurisdiction on planning matters, and I think we need to address that. Just a note to the side on that. Moving on, as to the inclusionary requirement, we're just not doing that today because we've got another effort. That's my understanding is while we hear things from the applicants, and that's just not part of our conversation. Is that-
Vice Chair Boss and Commissioner Bauke, correct, we're really anxious to get this through and get it started as a program so we can utilize it. So at this point, we can't, since we don't have the study, we can't do the in lieu fees, but it's something that I think, once we get that study, we'll be considering.
Okay. Because there's definitely, to me, a lot of good rationale about what they're saying, but there's other ways that we could probably get there. I'll harp on my item of an enhanced infrastructure finance district and taking the TIF and using that and then being able to waive all the central business district as an example. That's one thing that could be done, but we'll leave that for another day. The other is the application citywide. The council in this body clearly directed it to be citywide, and we still have this missing section of the city called the coastal zone. What's the timing of an amendment of the coastal plan? I know you have a number of others that have been lurking out there that haven't been done. That this would just be another one to add to the package, but what's the timing of getting that forward? Because citywide means citywide. Citywide doesn't mean all the city but the coastal zone.
Vice Chair Boss and Commissioner Bauke. So first, when we're talking about the coastal zone, I do want to highlight that there's a few sort of commercial buildings that would be eligible to convert to all residential in the coastal zone, so it's not the highest priority. We do have a number of items that are pertinent to housing in the coastal zone that have not been adopted yet. The thought was that, and the plan is, Title 30 would be submitted to the Coastal Commission as a full implementation plan amendment to the coastal land use plan. We have a lot of cleanup we need to finish with Title 30 before we can submit that package to the Coastal Commission. So eventually, we do want to proceed with this and other items in our zoning ordinance that would improve the housing situation in the coastal zone. It's just not quite ready yet. That'll be a long process, and it'll take a good bit of staff time to do. So it's on our radar, but we have a lot to accomplish first before we can submit the packet to the Coastal Commission.
But it will be done.
That's the plan.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have one last subject, which is, and this is in the ordinance, Section G, addressing average unit size. And I was trying to understand the logic of using 2,000 square feet for condos as an average unit. I mean, this means that there's units that are bigger than 2,000 and some that are a little smaller than 2,000, but the average is 2,000. And the same thing with the 1,200 square feet for rental units. There'd be units bigger and some smaller, but it just has to get to or be less than 1,200. What's the rationale for that, considering the objective is to have these units as much as possible at least meet the moderate affordability category and not necessarily be luxury housing? How do we get to these numbers?
Yeah, Commissioner Bauke, these numbers began by looking at the land use element in the general plan. It does describe how the average unit size density was figured out for the whole spectrum of average unit size maximums for the different density ranges. When you look at, I believe it's page 11, there is a nice tan box that talks about the kind of target unit size of 1,000 square feet for a two-bedroom, which at the time of the general plan was the unit that we were most in need of citywide. So when we started the conversation here about the adaptive reuse and the maximum average unit sizes, we started with 1,000 square feet for a rental unit. What would that be? But understanding that a lot of times you can't control where your windows are at or where your egress is or how your circulation is, maybe these units wouldn't be quite as efficient in an adaptive reuse project as they would be in a new construction where you have more control over it. So your floor plates and your window openings and all these other fun building code requirements will start to manipulate how efficient a building can be. So maybe 1,000 square feet isn't possible to have that two-bedroom unit. So we elected to suggest a larger average unit size of 1,200 square feet for rentals to try and accommodate some of that inefficiency that may occur in your floor plate. For ownership units, there's just a trend of those being slightly larger, and so we are trying to accommodate that in the allowance here for the ownership units versus the rental units, and that's where those values were generated from.
Okay, now you have a section following the exception provision, which basically seems to meet what sort of you just discussed.
Exactly.
Which allows for units to be bigger than the average, and I get that. So I would be, of the thought process, the threshold numbers should be much smaller.
Okay.
And I'll leave that to my commissioners to
Yes,
discuss.
please.
If our target is trying to get density downtown and getting as much units as possible, then I'd honestly recommend that we half these numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's the only comments and questions I have.
Great. We'll move to Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you. I really only have one question, and that is to staff. We've heard from one developer today in public comment. We've also had other public comment from other developers. Can you speak to the interest that developers and property owners have shown in utilizing this new ordinance as written? And specifically, are there developers who've said they want to convert their buildings into housing using the language that we have in front of us today?
Commissioner Peterson, we've definitely heard interest from the developer community. I wouldn't go so far as to say expressly what the ordinance says right now, because it's only been public for a week. But over the last few months, we have had a couple of projects come in at PREs or PLN statuses, or even just planner consultations, asking about being able to utilize an adaptive reuse ordinance. Unlimited density comes up a lot, where it's allowed comes up a lot. So we have been getting inquiries about this, and I was looking back just through an informal review of projects that have been coming in that maybe could be considered adaptive reuse, basically reusing an existing non-residential building to create housing. And there has been a significant increase in how many of those kinds of applications we've been receiving when I looked back 5 years to generate the example change in use projects that were included in the last staff report and this one. So there is definite community interest from the developers in being able to do adaptive reuse, and these incentives are definitely an incentive. Did that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
We'll move to Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize, I didn't realize after I questioned Mr. Romo that I could go on with questions, so I lost my turn there for a minute, but I just have a couple quick questions. I wanted to go back to the rationale for the 10 years, because I wondered if you considered the lockdown on COVID. I'm thinking, just a theory, I have no idea. Let's say the lockdown started on March 19th of 2020. And let's say a building was completed in March of 2019, and it was for another use. And then COVID hit, and it became pretty possible, it became clear that that building could no longer be used the way it was being used pre-COVID lockdown. So I'm thinking that there's a rationale to actually shorten that period, not make it less than 10 years for that very purpose, because we went through this enormous period of inactivity because of lockdown, and then, things trying to get back to normal. So can you comment on that, please? And would you be willing to consider that if my fellow commissioners would agree to that? That's just, a scenario that I kind of put together.
I mean, I can speak for myself. I'd have to get some more input. But we definitely did look at all the different impacts in reducing to 10 years. I don't think staff would be against considering something else.
Commissioner Wiscombe, I think that's a really interesting example. However, if you were to use that as an example, even a 1-year time period, right, might not be enough, because that was kind of an instant event that made a building not make sense anymore. And I don't know that we want to essentially not have a time period if you're thinking of reducing it more to 5 years, something like that, or if you're thinking of having some kind of exemption where if there is an economic crisis or something that we could write in that's an emergency type of situation that warrants it, that's certainly something we could look at. But I will say that overall, we didn't want to create a situation where someone is two-stepping a process to avoid building the open space and the things that we think are typically important for residential units, but that make sense when there's an existing building that we're trying to facilitate reuse. But we wouldn't want someone to kind of play that game. So that's the reason that we stuck with the 10 years.
Yeah, well, I think it would be important to look at that. I have no idea if there's a building in this city that is in that kind of predicament where it was actually built for another purpose and now is not being used because of what happened with COVID. But
yeah, Commissioner Wiscombe, actually, I do recall there was one building in about that situation that came online when COVID hit. I don't know how they ended up resolving it, but because it needed to get modifications through our current process, they didn't end up going through that process. So I'm not sure exactly how they resolved that. They must have found another use.
Well, maybe another way to approach this would be you leave it at 10 years, but have an exception for if the applicant can prove that the COVID period was what changed it. And I mean, it just gives us an opportunity to get more residential housing. So would that be something you might consider, that exception? If
Commissioner Wiscombe, we're absolutely open to considering that. Our preference is if you could provide any recommendations as part of the motion so that they can be presented directly to Ordinance Committee,
Right.
as opposed to us writing something and coming back to Planning Commission. That would be our preference.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate your flexibility. Okay, and then my other question just relates to one of the letters from the Coastal Housing Coalition that required the review of the ordinance after, I'm just going to put X years because I don't know when that will be, for analysis of use and effectiveness. Did you consider putting that in there to make sure that this ordinance actually achieves what it's supposed to achieve by actually having some adaptive reuse? Is there I don't think there's a review in the ordinance, and how, if there isn't, and my fellow commissioners agree to that, how do we handle that?
Vice Chair Boss and Commissioner Wiscombe, there is not a built-in review period for this ordinance or like sometimes a trial period or anything like that. We're not opposed. I mean, we often come back when we find out something just isn't working or we're not getting the results we want to see. It's not unusual for us to come back and make ordinance amendments. We have so many things that we need to move forward on the housing element and to report on. I'd prefer not to put that in the ordinance itself at this time. I think it would just tie up staff again. We'd love to see how this works, and we do have a metric in the housing element that we were wanting to hit 10 adaptive reuse projects in the time period of the housing element. So we do have that metric, and if we're not meeting it, maybe that would be a good time to come back and
Okay.
adjust.
Yeah, and I'm not even advocating for you to come back and have a formal meeting with the Planning Commission. I'm just advocating for some sort of, and maybe it just goes in our motion, for some sort of a review process to know that, because we have a lot of letters here that are saying you're not going to get much because of the inclusionary part. So, you know, we're going to want to know if that's the case, and, you know, has this all been for naught?
Yeah, and if I could add to that, we do have to annually report on housing element implementation, and at that time we could discuss how many applications came in and that sort of thing, so you have an
Yeah.
idea.
I mean, even if it's just a memo to Planning Commission or something, just that would be acceptable. And I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. We'll move to Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I will wear the hat of beating a dead horse here, but it is still not clear to me the rationale behind the 10-year limitation. So could you give me an example of what kind of a building would be built and would attempt to two-step, and what those things are going on there that are giving you the willies.
I'm going to let Allison answer that one.
Commissioner Barnwell, one example would be a hotel. To me, that would be the simplest example of a conversion because they're set up very similar to a residential unit. However, with hotels, we have no limits on how many rooms could be in that hotel, and the rooms don't require any kind of open space. So you would build it like a hotel and then come in and ask that it be converted to residential units. So that would be kind of the example that most easily comes to mind.
So why don't we specify hotels and get rid of the 10-year thing? I mean, because, and I'm not even against necessarily hotels, but to go back to what has already been said, we're trying to get housing. And we're suggesting that the two-step is wrong, but, you know, the 9-year project versus the 11-year project. Anytime we put these arbitrary numbers in there, I'm wondering, well, is it that we really don't like it, or we thought they're trying to trick us, or which component of this is it that we don't like if we're going to get some housing out of it?
Commissioner Barnwell, I definitely understand that perspective. I think it does come down to when we are looking at new buildings, you would design things a little bit different if you knew it was for a residential purpose.
Another question, a couple other questions. Why is it that we are only considering the conversion of non-residential units to residential as opposed to residential units to residential? And I think particularly of so many Victorian homes that are right now maybe 3 or 4 units and maybe potential conversions to some very nice upgraded residential units. And why aren't they included? Because there's a lot of those in the downtown area. Why can't they be part of this?
Commissioner Barnwell, the reason that we didn't include those is just because the zoning already allows those to be residential units at the density that we've planned for in the general plan. There are, you know, in most of those residential or those Victorians that are in the downtown area do have a zoning that allows for up to 27 units per acre. We actually have several that have already been converted that well exceed our current densities, and those are allowed to continue. So I think just the reason we didn't include that specifically is because of, you know, our existing zoning and general plan designation, and just wanting to keep kind of the neighborhoods with the density that had been planned for when it's an existing residential use.
All right, thank you. And another, the new law that just came out in January, I think it's SB 1211, allows for 8 ADUs in multi-residential apartments added to whatever the unit count is, up to 8. You guys are familiar with that, I assume. How does that support, intersect, or crash into our additional amount of square footage that we can add, the 10% or the 600 square feet or whatever it is you've been discussing?
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. So that bill is for multi-unit residential uses already, right? We're requiring these be non-residential to convert over, and ADUs don't count towards density the way it's written at the state law, so they already would be able to do what we're allowing them to do here.
So if someone converts and does the conversion, then they can add their ADUs to that, correct?
It'd be a separate project, yeah.
Right, and thus the expansion that we've talked about, the 10% and or the, does not, that's part of the original application.
Correct. So the
Okay.
600 square feet or 10% of the
Okay.
existing floor area would be under the adaptive reuse ordinance, and that
Okay.
space can only be for a residential amenity, so it can't include a residential unit. The intention is you need to add a laundry room or bike storage or a hotel, or not a hotel, sorry, a lobby, I'm sorry, a lobby to get in. You know, that could be something that you need to append to the outside of the structure, but no residential units could occur within that addition, so it'd be a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you, on your chart, you referenced, you had phrases that were something like no additional parking, or you kept referencing parking, and yet I'm under the impression that we can't impose parking anywhere on anybody anymore as a result of 2097, is that what it is?
Only within a half a mile of major transit stops, which have a very fund definition. It is mapped. I do have a map of it. I made that. Give me 1 second,
But the
please.
CBD, pretty much, the central business is
Almost
pretty much as good.
entirely the central business district. Yes, let me just figure out what number I need to look at. Here it is. So this is the AB, there it is, AB 2097, the major transit stops with that buffer in the bright fuchsia pink, overlaid with the mixed-use areas, the dark blue, and then those areas that allow multi-unit residential in the lighter blue. So all the areas not covered by the fuchsia that could utilize this adaptive reuse ordinance would still have to do some parking, and that's where the requirement for retaining the existing would be more impactful.
And does this include the new definition of
It
the
does.
headway time?
It does, yes.
Okay.
We don't have the 15-minute headways, or 20-minute headways, so it doesn't impact us.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. I have a couple of remaining questions. I think all of the others were asked. There were a couple of public comments about considering additional incentives for 100% affordable housing projects. And I understand that you can layer different incentives, like the Accelerate program. I don't know if it's actually accelerating affordable housing programs, but can you talk about potential incentives for 100% affordable projects?
Definitely. So that was something that when we were first conceptualizing this ordinance, we were really trying to prioritize the 100% affordable housing projects. And if you may remember, earlier iterations of this ordinance did include less applicability, so that projects that were providing a higher percentage of affordable units would be getting an incentive. Now that it's citywide, all projects that are creating housing get the same incentive, regardless if they're affordable or not. So we're really trying to incentivize affordable housing in that way because they can do it in more places with less restrictions on what exactly they have to do under the ordinance. Hopefully that helps out Mr. Frederickson. We also are looking at the requirements that state density bonus law allows, and those 100% affordable units could utilize some waivers and incentives from that. And I think that might answer all of it because you've already mentioned the Accelerate 2.0 program, which is available at present to all 100% affordable projects for both the entitlements and the building permit review. It kind of helps shepherd them through, prioritizes them on design review agendas when they're needed, and kind of just is always watching and shepherding on the kind of permit review side in-house to make sure that those projects are completed kind of at the top of the list for daily reviews when they come up.
And have projects actually gone through that process?
They have. I reached out just recently. We're doing some research on them for a pro-housing application, side note. But yes, I have been talking with our ombudsman. He is the person in charge of that. It does more than just affordable housing under the Accelerate 2.0, but he's been actively involved in quite a few recent affordable housing projects and making sure that they are getting through the entitlements and building permit process, as fast as they possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? One quick question? Yes, please.
One quick question. Help me understand this. So we talked about you waive the mandatory pre-application and concept review when required. How often do you think that will be used?
That's an excellent question, Commissioner DeLucio. I couldn't give you a number. We could look back and see how many you've looked at as Planning Commission for AUD in the past, 12 years now that it's been in place, but off the top of my head, I don't know and I can't project.
So this has to do with the AUD program?
It is a requirement of larger AUD program
Yeah.
projects, correct?
Gotcha. So just depends how many adaptive reuse would be.
Correct.
Go through this.
Yeah, that would meet the requirement that would trigger that. For adaptive reuse projects, it would no longer trigger that requirement
Thank
anymore.
you.
Mhm.
All right, so we'll move to comments, and I think it might be helpful to have, was it slide 18 with the recommended actions up today. So when we're making our comments, keep in mind that when someone makes a motion, they will need to summarize our comments. And a couple of things that I'm hearing so far, just as kind of a pulse check, it looks like a kind of a request for building in review, and is it working? That's already part of the annual progress report. Discussion about removing the requirement for units and instead requiring in lieu in all development sizes, or removing inclusionary for CBD, and also potentially changing to 5 years or changing from 10 years. So those are things that I'm hearing so far in the questions, but we'll move formally into comments. So we'll begin with Commissioner Bauke.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I definitely support the ordinance. I think it's overdue, honestly. But I do have one item which I very strongly will die on my sword over, which is the size of the units in the average. So considering there is an exception clause proposed in the ordinance, I strongly believe we should start with a thought process of something half of what is being shown, both on rental and owner. I might be willing to go a little higher than that, but it should be something near 600 and 1,000, unless somebody can explain to me why it should be something significantly higher. I'd love to know that. So we'll support it with that particular set of amendments. Thank you.
All right, we'll move to Commissioner DeLuccio.
Well, that was fast. First of all, I want to thank staff for all the work you've done on this. You know, I know I've asked some tough questions, but I really, really appreciate it, and also all the comments we heard also. As far as, I think the issues I brought up were I think actually this adaptive reuse is going to be really helpful if we can get it going even outside the essential business district. Because all the incentives that you call out, I think there's more room outside the essential business district based on the parcels are probably going to be larger, and to give these type of incentives, we may be surprised. We may find some additional adaptive reuse outside of the central business district. I agree with my Commissioner Bouncing about this average unit size. I don't know if I would go as low as from 1,200 to 600, but I was thinking more like maybe 900 or something, and maybe 1,500 for the ownership. So I think I'm supportive of that. I'm also like the idea of maybe doing the 5 years for the older buildings, for when the building's established, when you can do adaptive reuse. Otherwise, I think let's give this a try. And you know my feeling on inclusionary housing. I feel like maybe in the CB Central Business District, maybe we can waive the fees. But I think we need to definitely look at adaptive reuse as part of the, when the item comes back from the consultants. And also maybe it's an in lieu fee instead of having to have deed restricted units on site. So I just want to throw that out as well right now also. But otherwise, I'm supportive of this ordinance. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll move to Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Okay, I want to thank staff. Ms. Falk, I told you your report was excellent, and I think it really covered a lot, and you just did an amazing job on this. So thank you, and thank you to all of you who were here to answer our questions. Okay, I can absolutely support A, B, and C here. I would go along with the average size of the units possibly being smaller, but it's actually the maximum average unit size, right? So I think that, you know, the flexibility is fine because they don't have to be 1,200 square feet. They can be larger as long as you have smaller ones, and it gives the developer an opportunity to possibly put some for sale units in with some rental units. So you're dealing with the average unit size of, they cannot exceed this amount for their average. So I think it gives you a better mix, and it gives the developer more flexibility. I mean, they might end up with 600 square feet average unit size anyway, and that's acceptable, yeah. So I'm okay with the way it is, but I'm not gonna fall on my sword on that one. I think the motion should include the, just the review, whether it's check in with the Planning Commission in terms of, when you check in with HCD on the housing, you check in on this, and just a memo or something so we can, because this is kind of fluid at this point. And absolutely in lieu fees when you're ready. I hope that gets done sooner than later. We've been talking about it for a long time. And I absolutely support either moving from 10 years down to 5 years, or moving to the point where you can show that COVID really affected what use you had that you can no longer have, and you need to switch to housing. Whether it's an exception or that, I prefer the 5 years. I think that just gives more flexibility to people in terms of potential development. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the comments made by my fellow commissioners on each of the topics that they referenced. Ms. Carmen, would you be so kind as to put this on the projector? I came here all fired up on a topic that's not going to get the discussion I wish it would, but it is this inclusionary component, which, you know, we use the word crisis. The word crisis for housing means we're in trouble. And when we talk about this inclusionary and we listen to someone like, by the way, I had an ex parte conversation with Mr. Romo. He called me regarding his letter, just to let you know. But what are we talking about here when we do the inclusionary? I would like to show you briefly so that, and if you can make it as big as possible for people who have poor vision like myself. This is, and I understand that we need a cursor from the staff to cover where my cursor's going because my cursor doesn't show. No? Okay, well, okay, good. This is the city of San Diego, and this is their in lieu charge, and it's $22.55 per square foot of the development. This, and I presumed a standard 20-unit apartment, and each unit was 600 square feet. This is the amount of money that San Diego charges. Oakland, they don't have a per square foot, they have a per unit charge. So here's the math. Oakland would get $593,000 out of a 20-unit apartment. For some reason, Sacramento, I don't know what they're up to, they get $42,000. Down at the bottom, the biggest is San Luis Obispo with $660,000. Now, notice in this column here, if we give this to the esteemed Mr. Fredericks and his outstanding organization of Santa Barbara Housing Authority, if he can get a multiplier of 4 on those dollar amounts, then the $207,000 turns into $1 million. And even a measly $42,000 turns into $170,000. Versus down on the bottom, these are the actual construction costs of a 600-unit apartment at $500 a square feet, which could very well be low. I don't know. My son is a general contractor, so he does this stuff. But the cost per unit is $300,000. At 10% of 20 units, that means you're going to get $600,000. So you can see immediately by looking at this that we need to be getting in lieu fees instead of requiring that they build the unit. And you begin to see graphically why they don't want to build the unit. And then when you add in the factor that government will be in their pocket for whatever it is, 90 years. And I was thinking, by golly, this ordinance, I don't want to vote for this thing. And then I sit here, and of course it's a great ordinance. You guys have worked your buns off to get it done. And these other things need to be done, but we don't have staff for it, et cetera. So, but I wanted to be sure that everyone understood the rationale in just dollars and cents of why we need to do this, because we are losing housing by not doing this. The developers will line up. They'll say, yeah, sure, we'd be glad to give you $270,000 and let us build market units, and we're off and running, which is our goal. This whole ordinance, that's the goal of this whole ordinance, is to build more residential units. So it's got a missing component. I know why it has it. We all know why it has it, and we all know that we need to work on it. I thank you for everything that you've done. And I agree with the comments by all my commissioners, and I would like to have the 10-year drop to 5, and I don't want Mr. Bauke to fall on his sword here, so I'm going to go with whatever he wants to do. That's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll move to Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, staff, for all that you've done on this ordinance and for the conversation that we had before this meeting. I appreciate your time and your efforts. I support the idea of a reduction in average size, however that looks, but if we don't want to get into it, then that's fine. I understand that we're going to look at affordability later with the study, and, you know, interested in the idea of considering in lieu fees, of course. We'll see what happens with that. I'm okay basically with how this is. And then also the idea of checking in with Planning Commission when you connect with HCD will be good, just so that we stay up to date and informed of your efforts. And then also, yeah, I would support the reduction of years. And I'm sorry, but I am being called away. So you have my comments, and make the motion that you want.
Great, thank you. And I'll add a couple of comments as well. Just overall, I thought the staff report was really thoughtfully written, and it felt like you took us on the journey with you over the past couple of years, and really appreciated that it was concise, but still gave me the background and refreshed my memory about all of our conversations and feedback. So just thank you, really appreciate the staff report and the concise ordinance. I can also support the recommendation, and I'm fine with changing the size or flexibility in the size, reducing the years to 5 years, and passing along comments explicitly noting that we'd like to see this called out in the APR. And I'm hearing comments from others as well that it would be helpful to pass along our comments about in lieu fees to council to consider if that's part of the ordinance at this time, or just making sure that that's passed along explicitly. So those are my comments. So I'll open it up. I'll open the floor for a motion. And again, note the motion will need to summarize our comments to forward to council. Commissioner Bauke.
I'll give it a shot, and I'll presume others will want to add additional amendments, but I would like to have the commission follow the recommendation A, B, and C as described on the screen, with following modifications to the ordinance in section 30185.045 part B subset 2, change the occupancy issue to at least 5 years instead of 10. Change the go to section G, which is titled average unit size, change the rental unit size to 800 square feet, ownership units to 1,200 square feet. And what else did we have? We had a desire to have this come back. Was that correct, or what was your, no? A memo. What, a year, or is that an appropriate? Okay. I think, so that's my motion, and if anybody wants to add additional items to it, please do.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Vice Chair Boss, I just want to clarify, so we usually come to you with the APR as the annual progress report around March of every year. It's due to the state on April 1st, so that would be an appropriate time to.
Great.
So rather than a memo.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll incorporate.
Yeah, it's in the report anyway, how we're doing, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I
We'll
think
incorporate it into that process. Okay.
I think that's fair when we see the APR. Yeah, that would be great. And then, Commissioner Bauke, the only other thing I'd add is what Vice Chair Boss said, that we want to also include in the motion to a strong recommendation to City Council to move along the in lieu fees as opposed to actually doing the deed restricted units, to get that done so we can, we've been working on that for so long. So
I'd be amenable to that amendment.
Okay, great.
Can
And
I,
I'll be
Vice Chair
happy to-
Boss, ask for a clarification on that as well? You mean the separate program, though, not part of this
The
ordinance?
separate program that allows developers
Yeah.
to do in lieu fees, the one that Commissioner Barnwell showed.
Yeah.
Allows them to do in lieu fees as opposed to
Right.
actually do.
Based on the
deed
results of the
restricted
study
units.
that is now
Yes.
underway?
Yes.
Got it.
And I'll be happy to second the motion.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second from Wiscombe. Do we have any any further comments or discussion?
Madam Chair, if I may, I don't know how we do it, but I think we need some language regarding this in lieu fee that lights a fire under that concept. It isn't just the study undergoing somehow. It's like there needs to be, and I don't know how we say that, we give to the council that we think we are losing maybe tens of dozens of units every couple, 3 months because we don't have that. So there's some urgency associated with it.
I think our city attorney might have.
Boss, and Commissioner Barnwell, because we haven't necessarily agendized it for talking about this
In lieu?
separate study for the in lieu fees, I think the way that it was worded by Commissioner Wiscombe is acceptable enough because it does correlate with what we're doing here and what you'd like to see here in the future, but I don't want to go too far down that road.
I'm so glad we have legal counsel.
I think I used the
Thank
language
you.
strongly recommend, that if we strongly recommend that we accelerate the consideration of in lieu fees versus actually constructing deed restricted units. Is that acceptable, Ms. Ostringer?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion, I think Commissioner DeLucia?
Yeah, but I want to make it part of the motion, our direction here, and in relation to adaptive reuse, is what we're talking about today. So in relation to adaptive reuse, in lieu fees versus deed restricted, and also possibly looking on the CBD, Central Business District, to possibly waive the fees or treat them differently. So I wanted to give that direction.
Ms. Carmen, is that, okay, perfect. Any further discussion on the motion?
If Commissioner DeLucia wanted to add that, then we'd need it accepted by the motion maker and the...
I would accept that because I think that's something we definitely need to do.
I'm not clear what you're saying.
But we
It doesn't apply only to adaptive reuse. It applies in general.
But we're
It's a
talking about
program.
adaptive reuse today. We're not
I know.
talking about the inclusionary housing ordinance, the entirety. We're talking about the adaptive reuse, and in that context, the direction would be to look at deed restricted versus totally paying in lieu fees. And also, and maybe possibly waiving them or treating them differently in the Central Business District, and also to look at the other cities, how they treat adaptive reuse. So that
I think that's all part of the study.
Yes.
But this would all be part of HE 13.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of the study.
Just
All
want to
right,
make sure it's very
Any further discussion on
separate.
the adaptive reuse ordinance? All right, if not, Ms. Carmen, can we please have a roll call vote?
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. I'll begin with Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
Commissioner Barnwell,
Yes.
Commissioner Bauke,
Yes.
Commissioner DeLucia,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Boss.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you again to staff. We'll now close that item and move on to the administrative portion of our agenda, beginning with committee and liaison reports. So the staff hearing officer liaison report. Do we have anything to report, Commissioner Liaison?
I do, and actually our staff hearing officer is sitting right here, Ellen. So I did view the meeting yesterday, and you did approve a coastal development permit for 1109 Las Olas Avenue to convert an existing 336 square foot garage into an ADU, and that's it's not appealable to the Planning Commission. And then you had two other projects in front of you. One was 1715 Gillespie Street, and you approved the front setback modification to allow the structure to be increased in height within the required 20-foot setback for roof replacement due to fire damage. And then there was 3402 Madrona Drive, which is in San Roque. You approved the front setback encroachment and reduced open yard modifications. And those two items are appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 business days?
Calendar days.
Calendar days.
Thank you. Other committee and liaison reports, Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yeah, I had an email from the waterfront waterfront harbor community. And I'm just going to read it. As part of a strategic planning process and long-range planning effort, the City of Santa Barbara Waterfront Department is looking for your input on how well we balance our obligations to provide a mix of coastal-dependent, coastal-related, and visitor-serving services to the public. And then it's used the link below to participate in a brief survey aimed at gathering input on how well the mix of the waterfront services supports the general public. And then there's a link to the survey. So I can either forward this email to anyone that's interested in it, or I can find out more. I'm sure if you go to the waterfront department, you'll see the survey there. So I just wanted to tell you that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner DeLuccio.
HLC, on 6.4, there were three structures of merit destinations, designating all three for Spanish colonial revival style residences. And also 916 State Street, which the Santa Barbara International Film Festival has taken over the film center. They've received final project design approval, and they're looking to finish renovations in time for the February Film Festival.
Thank you. Any other committee or liaison reports? All right, then with that, it is 2:41 p.m. and this concludes our June 12th, 2025 Planning Commission hearing. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, July 3rd. So thank you all for being here and have a great rest of your day.